And the Shaykh has an introduction before he starts explaining the text. And so the author says, may Allah have mercy upon him. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. قال المحدث الشيخ Abdullah Al-Harari. Said the hadith scholar, Shaykh Abdullah Al-Harari. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Praise God, Lord of the worlds. Wassalatu wassalam ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabih. And may peace and blessings be upon our prophets Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and upon his family and his companions. Now for your information here, as-salatu was-salam, the salah and the salam are upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, what about the salah and the salam being upon his family and his companions? How does that work? That works when you make them accompany the mentioning of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if you mention his family and his companions without mentioning him, you don't say as-salatu was-salam. But when you mention the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with the salah and the salam, then you can accompany his mentioning with the mentioning of his family and his companions. وَبَعْد, thereafter, فَإِنَّ عِلْمَ التَّوْحِيدِ هُوَ أَسَاسُ قَوَاعِدِ عَقَائِدِ الْإِسْلَامِ. Indeed, the knowledge of monotheism is the base of the rules of the convictions of Islam. وَالْأَحْكَامُ الشَّرْعِيَّةُ مِنْهَا مَا يَتَعَلَّقُ بِالْاعْتِقَادِ. And the rules of the sacred law, the sacred rules, the sacred judgments, some of them pertain to conviction. وَالْأَحْكَامُ الشَّرْعِيَّةُ مِنْهَا مَا يَتَعَلَّقُ بِالْاعْتِقَادِ. And the sacred laws, the sacred rules, some of them pertain to conviction. وَالْعِلْمُ الْمُتَعَلِّقُ بِهَا يُسَمَّى عِلْمَ التَّوْحِيدِ وَالصِّفَاتِ. The knowledge related to that is called the knowledge of monotheism and of the attributes of God. وَمِنْهَا مَا يَتَعَلَّقُ بِكَيْفِيَةِ الْعَمَلِ. And some of those sacred laws pertain to the procedures of practice. وَالْعِلْمُ الْمُتَعَلِّقُ بِهَا يُسَمَّى عِلْمَ الشَّرَائِعِ وَالْأَحْكَامِ. And the knowledge related to that is called the knowledge of sacred law, of laws and rules, of sacred laws and rules. فَيَكُونُ الْعِلْمُ بِاللَّهِ وَرُسُلِهِ هُوَ أَشْرَفَ الْعُلُومِ لِكَوْنِهِ أَسَّاسَ الْأَحْكَامِ الشَّرْعِيَّةِ. And so, the knowledge about God and his messengers is the noblest of knowledges or of sciences because of its being the base of the sacred laws. وغايته الفوز بالسعادات الدينية والدنيوية. And its goal is triumph by the religious and worldly bliss. Maybe that could be translated better. Sa'adat, sa'ada. So sa'ada, it means happiness by itself, or something to that effect. Like if you're sa'id, means you're happy, or sa'ida, then you're happy. You have sa'ada. So this sa'adat ad-diniyah wa dunyawiyah. So we can ask for more specific explanation of as-sa'adat with that plural there like that. So I just translated it the way the word appears to me. So the goal of this science is al-fawzu, the triumph, the victory, bis-sa'adati diniyati wa dunyawiyah, by the religious and worldly bliss. or something like that. وبراهينه الحجج القطعية من عقلية وسمعية, and its proofs are the invincible arguments, whether intellectual or documentary, whether intellectual proofs or documentary proofs. Yani, this science of the creed, it has to have invincible evidence, as opposed to another science. Another science could have less than invincible evidence. It could have strong evidence that's not invincible. But the science of the creed has to have invincible evidence. هذا العلم يسمى علم التوحيد. This knowledge or science is called the science of monotheism. وعلم أصول الدين. And it's called the science of the fundamentals of the religion. ويسمى علم الكلام. And it's called the knowledge of kalam, theological rhetoric. أما تسميته بالاسمين الأولين. Now, concerning its being named by those first two names, فظاهر المعنى, the meaning is obvious. The knowledge of monotheism, that's clear. Why would it be called that? Because monotheism is the most important subject. And the knowledge of the fundamentals of the religion, why is it called that? Because the belief, the conviction is the fundamental of the religion. Everything else is secondary in comparison to conviction. وَأَمَّا تَسْمِيَتُهُ بِعِلْمِ الْكَلَامِ, but concerning its being called the science of kalam, this theological rhetoric, فَلِأَنَّ أَكْثَرَ الْخُصُومَاتِ بَيْنَ أَهْلِ الْحَقِّ وَبَيْنَ الْمُخَالِفِينَ, it's because most of the debates between the people of the truth and their opponents كان في تقرير الكلام, it was about, they were about verifying God's kalam, God's speech. لأن المنتسبين إلى الإسلام اختلفوا فيه, because those who are affiliated with Islam differed about it. They differed about the issue of God's speech. فهناك طرفا إفراط وتفريط. For there exists two extremes, two extents, an extent of extremism and an extent of neglect. إفراط and تفريط. So one of those is extremism, one of those is neglect. I forgot which one is which. Could look really quick here. Bismillah. Oops, not there. Here. Here, this is Al-Misbah, or no, this is Mukhtar. Bismillah. So we want to look up fa, ra, ta. Fard means excessive. فرط في الأمر قصر فيه وضيعه حتى فات. وفرط فيه تفريطا مثله. So the tafrit is the neglect. And then here وأفرط في الأمر جاوز فيه الحد. And the ifrat is the extremism, going too far. So tafrit is the neglect and the ifrat is the extremism. So there are two edges, two sides. One of extremism, going too far, and one of neglect, not going far enough. وَطَرَفُ وَسَطُ. And then there is a middle edge. So taraf means edge. And what he means here by taraf is group. So there are two groups, a group of extremism and a group of neglect. And there is a group of moderation. فأحد الطرفين المنحرفين عن الحق نفوا الكلام. One of those two groups that have deviated from the truth, they denied the speech of God. They negated the speech of God. عن أن يكون صفة لله تعالى ذاتية. They denied that speech would be an eternal attribute of God's self. كما نفوا سائر الصفات, just as they have negated the rest of the attributes. كالعلم والقدرة, like knowledge and power. يزعمون أنه إذا قيل لله صفات قائمة بذاته الأزلية, claiming that if it were said that God has attributes that exist because he exists because of his eternal self-existing, كان ذلك تعديدا للقدماء. Their claim is that that's multiplicity of eternal ones. They say, if you say God has eternal attributes, that would mean that the attributes are eternal. And if you say the attributes are eternal, then you're saying there's more than one eternal one. So that's their creed. So what this means is that they're saying God's attributes are different from him. In fact, he doesn't have any, because if he had attributes, they'd be different from him. And if he had attributes, they'd be eternal like he is, but different from him. So there would be more than one eternal one. We say God's attributes are not him nor something else. God's attributes are neither him nor something else. They say God's attributes are not him. And they say, therefore, he doesn't even have attributes, because if he did, they'd be eternal and not him. And then there would be more than one eternal one. So it's like they deemed the attribute a self, an independent self. It's like they deemed each attribute an independent self. Let me know if that's not clear for you. والطرف الآخر أثبتوا لله تعالى كلاما من جنس كلام الخلق. And the other group, they confirmed for God, exalted is he, speech, but that of the type of the speech of creations. الذي هو الصوت المشتمل على الحروف, which is something that's a sound comprised of letters. So then they believe Allah has created speech. وَالطَّرَفُ الْأَوَّلُ يُسَمَّوْنَ مُعْتَزِلَةً. So the first group, they are called Mu'tazila, outcasts. وَالطَّرَفُ الثَّانِي يُسَمَّوْنَ مُشَبِّهَةً. And the second group, they are called God comparers, مشبهة. وأما الفرقة التي هي الوسط. And concerning the group that is moderate, فهم أهل السنة والجماعة. They are the people of the prophetic way and the majority. قالوا, they said, كلام الله صفة أزلية قائمة بذاته أبدية. The speech of God is an eternal attribute existing by his self and everlasting. ليست حروفا وأصواتا. It is not of letters or sounds. وأثبتوا مع ذلك اللفظ المنزل. And with that, they also confirm the revealed expression. وَأَطْلَقُوا عَلَيْهِ كَلَامَ اللَّهِ. And they called this revealed expression the speech of God. So that means they used the term the speech of God for two things. لأنه عبارة عن الكلام الأزلي الأبدي القائم بالذات المقدس. They called it as such because it is an expression of, or a reference to, the eternal, everlasting speech that exists by the Holy Self. فلكون أكثر الخلافات بين أهل الحق وبين الطرفين المخالفين. And so, since most of the differences between the people of the truth and the two opposing groups كان في الكلام, it was about, or they were about, that most of that was about the speech of God, سمي هذا العلم علم الكلام, then this science of the creed in general was named after that particular topic. So it's called the knowledge of the speech, علم الكلام. فهو بالنسبة لأهل الحق الاشتغال به بتقرير دلائله أمر ديني مهم. And so it is for the people of the truth that is practicing it and being occupied with it by verifying its proofs, the proofs of the issue. It's a religious matter, an important religious matter. وَلَيْسَ بِدْعَةً مُنْكَرَةً. It's not an objectionable innovation. بَلْ قَالَ الْفُقَهَاء إِنَّهُ فَرْضُ كِفَايَةٍ. In fact, the jurists said this field is a communal obligation. كيف? How would it not be? وَقَدْ ثَبَتَ عَنِ السَّلَفِ الصَّالِحِ الاشْتِغَالُ بِهِ. When it's confirmed about the pious Salaf that they were busy with this science. فَمِمَّنِ اشْتَغَلَ بِذَلِكَ الْإِمَامُ أَبُو حَنِيفَةَ. Amongst those who practiced that was Imam Abu Hanifa, وَالْإِمَامُ الشَّافِعِي رضي الله عنهما, and Imam Ash-Shafi'i, may Allah accept from both of them. And when we read Al-Izhar, the Shaykh gave us lots of documents about Ash-Shafi'i being a practitioner of Kalam. As for Abu Hanifa being a practitioner of Kalam, that's evidenced by his 5 treatises, as well as his followers who take after him, the Maturidis. The Maturidis, they are Hanafis in creed, because Abu Hanifa had a madhab in creed. And they don't oppose Abu Hanifa in that. Their practice of Kalam and their being busy with Kalam is really just their taking after their Shaykh, their main Imam, who's Abu Hanifa. حتى إنه ناظر حفصا الفرد. Ash-Shafi'i even debated Hafs al-Fard, Hafs the unique. That's his nickname. Hafs the unique. And Ash-Shafi'i used to call him Hafs al-Munfarid, Hafs the deviant. His nickname, al-Fard the unique, that's what the Mu'tazila called him. So the Shaykh here called him by the name he was famous by. فَقَطَعَهُ الشَّافِعِيُّ بِالْحُجَّةِ. And Ash-Shafi'i silenced him with arguments or evidence. لِأَنَّ حَفْصًا الْفَرْدَ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُعْتَزِلَةِ. Because Hafs the unique, he was one of the Mu'tazila. الْقَائِلِينَ بِأَنَّهُ لَا كَلَامَ لِلَّهِ. Those who say that God does not have any speech. بِمَعْنَى الصِّفَةِ الْقَائِمَةِ بِذَاتِهِ. With the meaning of an attribute that is existing by his self. Yani, confirmed for his self. It exists because He exists. Yani al-qa'imatu bi-dhatihi, we usually say confirmed for himself. Because Shaykh explained, al-qa'imatu bi-dhatihi means athabita bi-dhatihi, confirmed for himself. And the meaning of qa'ima is mawjuda. It's existing. That's the meaning of thubut. Thubut means wujud, existence. So as-sifatul qa'imatu bi-dhatihi, it means an attribute that exists because he exists. إنما كلام الله عنده ما يخلقه في غيره. Rather, God's speech, according to him, hafs, is something that he creates in something else. He's saying God's speech is something that would come forth from a creation. كالشجرة التي كان موسى عندها, like the tree that Musa was like the tree where Musa was. They're saying Musa alayhi salatu wassalam, he was at a tree and then speech came out of that tree. This speech that came out of that tree, that's the speech of God. So what they mean to say is anything that would be called the speech of God is not something eternal confirmed for himself. And that means he doesn't have any attribute of speech that's confirmed for himself. So if there were something that would be called the speech of God, it's something created, like a speech that comes out of a tree. Abu al-Muzaffar al-Asfarayini, he said, this would mean, though, that really, if the speech came out of the tree, then the orders and prohibitions would be from the tree. Because, he said, I wish I knew how someone's speech would come from someone else. How could someone's speech come from someone else? So if that's not really the speech of God, and it's a speech that came out of the tree, and it's only being called the speech of God, it means really it's the tree's speech. And then the tree would be Moses's commander and forbidder. That's blasphemy. Amma al-Imam Abu Hanifa, and concerning Imam Abu Hanifa, radiyallahu anhu, may Allah accept from him, فقد سافر نيفا وعشرين مرة من الكوفة إلى البصرة لمناظرة أهل الأهواء. He traveled 20-something times from Al-Kufa to Al-Basra to debate with the people of devious desires. So Al-Kufa, that's a city in Iraq, as well as Al-Basra, it's another city in Iraq. So the country is Iraq. He went from this city to that city in that country. And so these are like some major cities, and being major cities means that there's things going on there. لِمُنَاظَرَةِ أَهْلِ الْأَهْوَاءِ, he did that for debating with the people of the devious desires. كَالْمُعْتَزِلَةِ وَالْمُلْحِدِينَ, like the Mu'tazila and the irreligious. وَأَلَّفَ خَمْسَ رَسَائِلَ فِي عِلْمِ الْعَقِيدَةِ, and he authored 5 treatises in the science of the creed. وَنِسْبَتُهَا إِلَيْهِ صَحِيحَةٌ, and their attribution to him is authentic. كما قال الحافظ والفقيه اللغوي الحنفي مرتضى الزبيدي, as said by the Hafiz, the Hadith headmaster, and the faqih, the linguist, al-lughawi, and the faqih, the jurist, and the lughawi, the linguist, al-Hanafi, the Hanafi, Murtada al-Zabidi, Muhammad Murtada, rahimahullah ta'ala, al-Zabidi. His name's Muhammad Murtada, so Shaykh just called him here Murtada. His name's like a compound, Muhammad Murtada. He said, إِنَّهَا ثَابِتَةٌ بِالْإِسْنَادِ الصَّحِيحِ. They are indeed confirmed by authentic transmission. And the Shaykh talked about that in detail in his book, Ad-Dalil al-Qawim. Also, Abu al-Muzaffar al-Isfarayini or al-Asfarayini in At-Tabsir fi ad-Din, and he is an Ash'ari. He said the books of Abu Hanifa are confirmed, and he took them also by chain of narration. وَأَمَّا مَا يُرْوَى عَنِ الشَّافِعِي. And now concerning what was reported or is reported about Ash-Shafi'i, min annahu dhamma hadha al-ilm, that he dispraised this knowledge of kalam. فَغَيْرُ الصَّحِيحِ. That's not authentic. Yani, it's not authentic that Ash-Shafi'i dispraised ilmul kalam. That's praiseworthy. The praiseworthy ilmul kalam. That's not authentic. وإنما الصحيح عنه ذمه لكلام أهل البدع الاعتقادية. What is rather authentic about him is his dispraise of the rhetoric of the people of heretical conviction, innovated conviction. ثم إن النقل عنه روي بلفظين. Furthermore, the documentation from Ash-Shafi'i was narrated with two expressions. When he says two expressions, doesn't mean only two expressions. You could say, I have two fingers. Doesn't mean you only have two fingers. Or if you had two houses, you could say, I have a house, I have a car, but maybe you have two cars. أحدهما أنه قال. Yani, I'm saying that because there's several things like that. Like when we took the text of Abu Shuja', he says, the recommendations of wudu are 10. There's like 50 of them though. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, there are 7 who shall be shaded under the shade of the arsh. That doesn't mean it's not more than 7, but there are 7. أحدهما أنه قال. One of those two is that he said, لأن يبتل المرء بجميع ما نهى الله عنه ما خلا الشرك ما خلا الشرك بالله. Indeed, for a person to be inflicted with all of what Allah forbade him, except for paganism, خَيْرٌ مِّنْ أَن يَبْتَلِيَهُ اللَّهُ بِالْكَلَامِ. That's better than for Allah to afflict him with kalam. So that's the wording that a Wahhabi would bring to you to discredit the kalam and say, Ash-Shafi'i dispraises the kalam. So kalam here is, in this version, that's the kalam of the heretics, not all the kalam. وَالثَّانِي, and the second narration is, لأن يلقى الله العبد بكل ذنب ما خلا الشرك بالله. For the slave, if I translate literally, for the slave to meet God. Yani, that means for him to be judged on resurrection day. So that's what it means. If I were to translate it literally, for the slave to meet God with every sin except paganism. خير من أن يلقاه بشيء من هذه الأهواء. That's better for him than to meet him, meaning to encounter God's judgment with any hint of these devious desires. وهذا اللفظ الثاني رواه عنه الإمام أبو بكر ibn al-Mundhir. This second wording, Imam Abu Bakr ibn al-Mundhir narrated it from him, from Ash-Shafi'i. ورواه عنه الحافظ البيهقي وغيرهما. And also Hafiz al-Bayhaqi narrated that from him and others. وَالْأَهْوَاءُ جَمْعُ هَوَى. And the ahwa, the devious desire, is the plural of hawa, the devious desire. It means in language a preference. Al-ahwa, the preferences. That's a plural. The preferences. Al-ahwa is the plural of hawa. The hawa is the hubb, the love. وهو عبارة عن عقائد الطوائف المنحرفة, and it's a reference to the convictions of the deviated groups, their love. That's their deviant, that's their devious desires. Yani, that's what they have in their hearts that would cause them to argue for what's invalid. It's similar to how a person, you know, the type of person who doesn't take responsibility for anything he does. What would that person do if someone never accepts to take blame for anything? Then no matter what you say to that person, he will find a way just to argue or turn the issue or change it, etc. This is like having hawa. فتبين أن ذم الشافعي منصب على الكلام الذي هو تقرير عقائد أهل البدعة. And so it became clear that Ash-Shafi'i's dispraise applies to the rhetoric, which is verifying the creeds of the people of innovation. It's the heretics arguing to substantiate his creeds. Min mu'tazilatin wa ghayrihim, whether Mu'tazila or others. The Mu'tazila were the worst at that. Yani the most diabolical at that. لأن الأهواء في عرف العلماء هي عقائد البدعيين المخالفين لأهل السنة والجماعة. Because ahwa, desires, in the norm of the scholars, yani in their terminology, meaning not linguistically, but as a jargon, it is the convictions of the opposing heretics, the heretics in opposition to the people of the prophetic way and the majority. فَمَنْ لَمْ يُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَ هَذَا وَهَذَا. So anyone who did not differentiate between this and that, حَتَّى صَرَفَ لِسَانَهُ إِلَى الطَّعْنِ بِأَهْلِ السُنَّةِ وَالْجَمَاعَةِ المشتغلين بعلم الكلام الذي هو إثبات عقائد أهل السنة بالدلائل. And then he set his tongue loose to criticize the people of the prophetic way and the majority who are busy with the knowledge of theological rhetoric. That theological rhetoric, which is the confirmation, substantiation of the convictions of the people of the prophetic way, bidalaili, by proofs and arguments, ta'yiran lahum, dispraising them, bihadha al-ilm, dispraising them for this knowledge, deeming them heretics and philosophers because of this. فَهُوَ جَاهِلٌ بِالْحَقِيقَةِ. Then he's ignorant about reality. لِأَنَّ الشَّافِعِيَّ مُرَادُهُ بِالْأَهْوَاءِ مَا كَانَ عَلَى خِلَافِ مُعْتَقَدِ أَصْحَابِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم. Because Ash-Shafi'i, his intent by the word ahwa, desires, is what is against the conviction of the companions of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they are counted as part of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, it includes the companions. وَمَنْ تَبِعَهُمْ, and those who followed the companions. بِإِحْسَان, those who follow them in goodness. كَبِدْعَةِ الْمُشَبِّهَةِ وَالْجَهْمِيَّةِ وَالْمُعْتَزِلَةِ, like the heresy of the God comparers and the Jahmites and the Mu'tazilites. So the Mushabbiha, the God comparers, you know them. We're most familiar with them. Those are the most active in our time. The Jahmites, the followers of Jahm ibn Safwan, what did he believe? He believed in that the slaves have no will and no power to do anything. No one has any will, no living creature, according to him, has any will to do anything. That's blasphemy. And he believed that paradise and hell come to an end. That's blasphemy. And he had other beliefs. And the Mu'tazila, you know them, they believe what? That there's no destiny. Or in other words, that they make their own destinies. That's the same thing. Saying there's no destiny and saying one makes his own destiny, that's the same thing. That's blasphemy. And they believed in denying the attributes of God. And they believe that Allah has obligations and prohibitions. Yani, they believe that God has duties and other things, including denying any special merits for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of their beliefs, you might not hear about a lot, but it's documented about them, is denying any special merits for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, like what? Like the river of Kawthar, and like the greater intercession. You know about those, inshallah. لِأَنَّهُمْ تَرَكُوا تَنْزِيهَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى, because all of those groups have abandoned the exaltation of God. Exalted is He. عَمْ مُشَابَهَةِ خَلْقِهِ, the exaltation of God from comparison to His creations. وَرَضُوا بِاعْتِقَادِ أَنَّ كَلَامَ اللَّهِ مِنْ جِنْسِ كَلَامِ الْمَخْلُوقِ, and they accepted believing that the speech of God is the type of speech of creations. Min kawnihi hurufan wa aswata, being letters and sounds. وَذَلِكَ مِنْ فَسَادِ عُقُولِهِمْ, and that is due to the corruption of their intellects. May Allah protect us. حيث قاسوا الخالق بالمخلوق, by comparing the creator to the creations. So the Mu'tazila, even although they are a type of atheist, but they do have tashbih, like saying that if God were to punish a slave for something that he willed for the slave to do, he would be unjust. That's tashbih. Saying, for God to punish a slave for what God willed for the slave to do is injustice. That is comparing God to the creations in itself. وَلَقَدْ أَحْسَنَ الْقَائِلِ, and so good was the sayer. Yani, so accurate was the sayer. And footnote is, according to Ibn Hajar al-Haytami in Al-Fatawa al-Hadithiyah, he says Judge al-Baqilani is the sayer of these lines of poetry we're about to say. that Al-Baqillani, he composed these lines, yani, he freestyled them. He freestyled these lines when it was said to him that some people dispraise the knowledge of kalam. What are those lines? عَابَ الْكَلَامَ أُنَاسٌ لَا عُقُولَ لَهُمْ وَمَا عَلَيْهِ إِذَا عَابُوهُ مِنْ ضَرَرِ مَا ضَرَّ شَمْسَ الضُّحَى فِي الْأُفْقِ طَالِعَةً أَلَّا يَرَى ضَوْءَهَا مَنْ لَيْسَ ذَا بَصَرِ. Some people who have no intellects, who are not intellectuals, have dispraised the kalam. And there's nothing against it when they dispraised it of harm. Yani, their dispraise of it harms it not. The sun of the morning in the horizon, rising, is not harmed by its light not being seen by someone who lacks vision. ثم معرفة هذا العلم على مرتبتين. And furthermore, knowing this knowledge is on two levels. مرتبة الوجوب العيني ومرتبة الوجوب الكفائي. The level of a personal obligation and the level of a communal obligation. فالمرتبة الأولى, and so the first level, هي معرفة أصول العقيدة. It is knowing the fundamentals of the creed. وهذه واجبة على كل مكلف. These are obligatory on every accountable one. Meaning, like learning the beliefs that's mentioned in the summary of obligatory knowledge. If someone learned that and he didn't learn more, and he was just a layman with correct belief in Allah and His Messenger, and believing in the matters that the Messenger spoke about of the unseen and what shall happen in the afterlife, then he fulfilled his personal obligation. والمرتبة الثانية هي مرتبة الاقتدار على تقرير العقائد الإسلامية. And the second level is the level of being capable of verifying the Islamic convictions bil adillah, by proofs, by arguments. مع الاقتدار على دفع الشبه التي يريدها البدعيون. With the capability of repelling the fallacies produced by the heretics. لدحضها, to collapse them. وإبطالها, and debunk them. وسائر شبه المنحرفين, and the capability of repelling the rest of the fallacies of the deviants. من الملحدين الذين لا ينتحلون دينا من الأديان, such as the irreligious people who do not practice any religion. وغيرهم, and others. ومن هؤلاء الذين يقال لهم الفلاسفة الإسلاميون, and such as those who are called Islamic philosophers. وَلَيْسَ لَهُمْ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ نَصِيب, and they have no share in Islam. كَابْنِ سِينَا وَالْفَارَابِي وَابْنِ رُشْدٍ الْحَفِيدِ, like Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi and Ibn Rushd, the grandson, not the grandfather. Lal-Jad, not the grandfather. Not Ibn Rushd, who's the grandfather. Ibn Rushd, who's the grandson. فَإِنَّهُ مِنْ أَهْلِ السُّنَّةِ, the grandfather is indeed amongst the people of the prophetic way.